One of the reasons that we wanted to invite Reverend Pat was, and other folks from the LA Queer Interfaith Clergy Council, is the fact that for want of a better term for gay and trans people in this country, it's their time in the barrel. There is a cynicism in American politics that has worked very, very well, probably since the beginning of the founding of the Republic. That if you can find an enemy, and make an enemy. It's not even a real one. You can make an enemy. You can coordinate votes. It's happened to almost every ethnic persuasion. It's happened to almost every religion in this country. And it's even better to do it with people you don't understand or have just a very tangential understanding of, because you can paint them any way you want. So there's one party in this country that was able to make some really good headway in their endeavors over the last few years by pushing things like anti-trans legislation, or doing things like trying to shut down somebody who just happened to be dressed in drag that's reading to kids in the library. Why they don't do that in children's beauty pageants, I don't know, but they're more fixated on somebody that might be dressed in drag. So I was really heartened to see that there was a group of clergy that was speaking out against this and pushing back on that narrative. And that's where it needs to start, is the pushing back on the narrative. Because when it's just a simple cynical endeavor to make a enemy that you don't have, you need to have people's participation in that ignorance. So being able to say that's not the case, and maybe seeing it from somebody who is an imam or has a priest collar, a clergy collar, that can add the weight that we need to in this fight. So that's a long introduction for somebody who is doing a lot of great work. But this is I'm going to introduce Reverend Dr. Pat Langlois. Is that how you're pronouncing your last name?
Pretty close, yeah. Langlois.
Okay. Yeah. Langlois. With someone with the last name Banyalis, I understand how it's hard to. But Langlois is senior pastor of Metropolitan Community Church, and she's also an organizer for the LA Queer Interfaith Clergy Council, and that's serving as an umbrella organization for LGBTQ-affirming congregants in the region. So, Reverend Pat, floor is yours.
Take it away. Awesome. Well, once again, thank you to the group and to Rick for reaching out and inviting us to be a part of the conversation. He's absolutely correct. The LGBT community is, a huge target right now. We have been in the past and are again. Over the course of the last number of decades, especially since before and then immediately after Stonewall in 1968, faith leaders or people of, there's been queer folk in faith communities since the beginning of time. And there have been those of us who are clergy or ministers as well. However, it really hasn't been until probably the 70s that most of us started to at least semi come out. Some of us have had the luxury of being in denominations where, in metropolitan community churches, pretty much we're all LGBT. So, coming out is not a big deal and we can be authentically ourselves. Over here, we're Lutheran, a Presbyterian, a Catholic, not so much. So back in the 90s, LAQuICC was formed. Originally, we were formed as a support group, if you will, a support network for one another. I'm going to share with you some of the pretty slides that we put together. We were founded in the early 1990s, and originally we were founded as the Los Angeles Lesbian, Gay, and Bisexual Clergy Association, originally formed to support other LGBT clergy in the area. And during the height of the AIDS truly decimating our congregations and clergy alike, as well as a high rate of burnout, LGBT clergy needed one another. Two of the first co-chairs were Rabbi Denise Edgar from Colamy and Reverend Dan Smith from West Hollywood Presbyterian, later West Hollywood UCC. They facilitated the group and its first gatherings. They were joined by Reverend Nancy Wilson from Metropolitan Community Church, Los Angeles. They were the original coordinators. Some of our first items of action, if you will, is we were very, very active in HIV and AIDS work here in the Los Angeles area, both pastorally and politically, and the group grew. The beginning years, we also had a rotating column in The Advocate, an LGBT publication that highlighted spiritual and LGBT issues. This group was also very active in the marriage equality issue, as well as immigration and other intersectional issues. Not long after its founding, it held the Interfaith Pride worship service on the corner of La Cienega and Santa Monica Boulevards, across from what we call, quote, the haters. Let's just say they don't like us. Around 2005, the group changed its name to Los Angeles Queer Interfaith Clergy Council, and our unofficial motto is, "We are in your faith." This change came about because we wanted to, quite frankly, be inclusive of those who didn't necessarily identify as lesbian, gay, bisexual, or transgender, but were allies as well. The term queer, while itself sometimes is controversial, it is an umbrella term that includes folks no matter their orientation. And currently we're very active in we're very active in a lot of issues that are facing schools and school districts, especially around what's now being termed parental rights groups that are flooding school districts with homophobic and transphobic rhetoric, protests, challenges to books, teachers, and LGBT support. And it is really vital that we are present because much of the opposition is veiled in religious dogma. Recently, we were invited to Satakoy Elementary, Glendale Unified School District, and Chino Valley Unified School District to be a peaceful, calming presence. At each of these, the organizers and police alike were incredibly grateful that we were there, and the parents at Chino Hills literally were in tears because they did not know. And this is important because all of us here come from a faith tradition. They did not know that there were faith leaders who cared. And as we say, as long as there is a need, we're there. Currently, we are comprised of members of clergy from Beth Chaim Hadashim, Keeping It Sacred, Colamy, Christ Chapel of the Valley, Founders Metropolitan Community Church, MCC United Church of Christ in the Valley, Muslims for Progressive Values, Buddhists, Catholics, Episcopals, Hindu, Lutherans, Methodists, Pagan, Presbyterian, Sikh, United Church of Christ, Unitarian, Universalist. And Gerald, did I miss any? I'm not sure. I think I got them. I want to share a few pictures with you of some of our congregations. These pictures were actually taken during the pandemic. We still, what I mentioned, we started in early on, the Interfaith Pride Service. We continued even during COVID. And so these pictures here are just some of our they are the congregations of member clergy. This is BCC. This is Gerald's church, Christ Chapel in the Valley, which is in North Hollywood. This is what it is on the inside. Founders MCC. They are located at Prospect in Vermont. This is the church from the outside. Inside. Keeping it sacred, Rabbi Heather Miller at 7:00. Rabbi Heather Miller, very active with us, has been for some time. She has Keeping It Sacred, an outreach to the Jewish community. This is the church that I pastor. This is from our garden. These are some of our pastors who are involved. St. Matthew's Lutheran. This is a heterosexual pastor who's no longer here. She just recently moved, but St. Matt's Lutheran has been very involved. Pastor of Woodland Hills Community Church. This is their church. Unitarian Universalist. Currently, we don't have a clergy from there, but we did have a clergy from there who was a part of us. Vision Church, new group. They are in Melrose area, primarily an African American Pentecostal church. Amazing folks, and that's who we are. And so, why am I involved? I'm involved because, as a queer clergy, yes, it is really nice to have colleagues to go talk about the issues that, quite frankly, are some of them are unique to our situations and some are not. We did for a long while have clergy who were not out in their churches and needed one another to be of support. I mean, imagine that for anybody who's in a faith community and has been in a position of leadership, not to be able to be authentically yourself with your colleagues. And the other reason for getting together was then to brainstorm and to find out how we can help one another in our own ministries, and then collectively, what are the issues we can address? As I said, we were really active in the HIV/AIDS movement in West Hollywood, North Hollywood, very much involved in the marriage equality issue. And now, as I said, currently collectively kind of doing the onslaughts from outside. Gerald, I want to pass it to you for you to be able to share, if you would, why you're involved and why you see the importance of our group.
Pretty much what you talked about, Pat, kind of covers it all, though. It has been great with the support. And my dad was also a pastor of a Pentecostal church. So whenever he was alive, I had him to go to, but there were questions I'd bring to him and say, in all my years of ministry, I never had to deal with that. So it was great to have those who had and dealt with it. So we are there for support. And the work that we've been doing, especially lately with the LGBTQ issue in schools, is it's encouraging to see clergy come together. And it is the captain of the North Hollywood Police Department was so thankful that we were there because there were some rebel rousers on both sides. They were just trying to cause trouble. And so just our presence seemed to help, they felt, keep some of it down and help. They used us then to help, like if the crowd needed to be shifted, to help get the crowd shifted, and so that there would be less conflict. So everyone still had their right to express their views, but not it be in each other's attacking. So being a part of that has been encouraging and been helpful. And with the marriage equality, to see the clergy all stand together and make a stand publicly was also, it not only was it good for people to see, but it was good for those in our own congregations to realize that we're not in this alone, that it's not just us. So I think when our congregation knows that I'm involved with this, it encourages them to feel like we're something bigger than just one congregation in North Hollywood. So that's a lot of my involvement. And I'd been attending for a while when there was a need for a new co-chair, and Pat asked me to be a part. So I've been helping her, and we make a pretty good team. Our talents work together, it seems like. So I'm thankful to be a part of it and to work with Pat.
Cool. Thanks, Gerald. So I want to show you just a few pictures of kind of a little bit more of who we are, and then delve a lot more into the current situation and, to answer the question, how is it that you all and others can help? So the first thing I'm going to do is, as I said, just share with you a little bit more of like the who are we, and these are pictures from some of the things that we have. Oops, didn't want to do that. Okay. So this was we've been on the boulevard. This is recent. This was this year, our Interfaith Pride service. We held it at Founders. In here, you're going to see from left to right, some of the people you're seeing is Gil Sharma, who is from the United Religious, I always get it, URI initiative. I can never get it right. He himself is Sikh and Hindu. You see some members of MCC United Church of Christ. In the top with the collar blue shirt next to me is Reverend Sammy Haynes, the pastor of Vision. That's 4 people down. You see Rabbi Jillian from BCC. We at this service, we thought it was really important to have drag performance. We looked at it as sacred dance, sacred liturgy. So that's who's down there. On the right side, you see Reverend Gerald. On the left of Gerald in the picture is Thomas Diaz from All Saints Episcopal. You see members of MCC, Founders MCC, and some from their community. This was the altar that we created, bringing together all of our backgrounds to the event. We've also been asked to be a part of Pet Blessings of all things. So we've, all things are sacred. So we do everything from pride protests to blessings. This was a few years ago. This was this is obviously, we were all still masked, but it was important for us to have out to the community at large that we were still there. This was on the boulevard a few years ago. We have in here some people from the Buddhist community, Rabbi Lisa Edwards. She is she joined in 1994. And so on. Reverend Elder Alejandro Scotto, he was going to try to be here, but it's too early for him. Again, some others, so you can see folks are here. Unitarian and Bishop Clement, Catholic from way back when. So, these are the different things we've gone. This year, we also, while this was not our event, this was All Saints Episcopal Church. They just had their interfaith service. This is Rabbi Heather Miller. This is Tehil. This is Pastor Lucia Chappelle from Founders MCC. And then we joined together and was in the San Fernando Valley Pride event. Now this year, so I'm going to stop this for just 1 second. This year, as things began to heat up, and I'm going to back up just a little bit, and Rick, you mentioned it, during the last presidential regime, we heard about, and prior to that, it was really exciting and thrilling and like, wow, we've, reached Mecca when, when we had the right to marry. And I never, and Gerald, probably you too, never in my lifetime ever thought that I was going to have the ability and the right to marry my partner ever. Right. And imagine what that would be like not to be able to get married, right? And so when that happened, we really felt like, wow, we've made it and everything else is going to be a cakewalk. But in the back of many of our minds, we also knew there was going to be a backlash. And I think coming out of coming out of the AIDS era in the 80s and 90s, coming out of, the 60s and 70s, which many of us have lived through, I didn't think we would go back that far. And I honestly feel we have, personally. We're right about on the where I feel we are personally is we're on that precipice of going one way or the other back down the hill. When the ban on transgender folk in the military came out, honestly, I was like, where on earth did that come from? Right? Because there hadn't been any conversation about like trans folk being an issue in the military. I mean, don't ask, don't tell was gone. You could be in the military. And I know that for myself, in the back of my mind, I'm like, oh man, this is not good. And as we've seen, it has not been good and things have gotten worse. The hysteria that has been whipped up, and it is the same thing that has been done to the African-American community and communities of color, have gone after the children, because God knows, the whole bathroom thing, because then we started to hear about, we heard about how transgender women were actually just men wanting to go into a women's restroom to go after the children. Right? We've heard that before, haven't we? The predator, and so this whole predatorial myth started to whip up again, right? And then we've seen things go from there. The next step that we have then seen is the hysteria that has been caused about, oh my God, and Rick, you referenced it, the drag queens story hour, right? Like, what's wrong with kids wanting to listen to a book being read? But that got whipped up. So the attacks have been primarily on the transgender community because people don't know as much about the transgender community, whether it's drag or people who are trans. So we saw it starting in Florida. Now, I remember a few months ago, I was sharing a message at church and around October. And I remember saying that at that point, there were 241 anti-LGBT bills that had been proposed in the United States. Now it's over 500 anti-LGBT pieces of legislation that have been proposed, and almost 100 of those have been passed. Now, we are grateful that some of them are being, there've been injunctions put upon them in courts. That's not the case everywhere. The worst part that's happened is the hysteria that's been whipped up in the last 2 years is off the charts. And we can look at, so back in October, when everything was starting to happen, I became more in the forefront, was talking to a number of my colleagues, Gerald included. And I'm like, we've got to come out and our presence has to be known. So there's a day called the Transgender Day of Visibility that happens in November. November. No. May. What was our day? It was May. Transgender Day of Remembrance is in November. Visibility is in May. Transgender Day of Remembrance is in November. And by the way, and what that's about is it's an annual remembrance of those trans people who are trans in our community who've been killed or have taken their life because of transphobia. That, unfortunately, the statistics of that are primarily women of color. And I'd say 80% of those people who've been killed have, so there's a lot of intersectionality going on. So the Trans Day of Visibility was a perfect opportunity, we felt, to get the voice of spiritual leaders back out in this conversation, because we were not hearing voices of faith speaking up and speaking out. And that's really important, folks, in this conversation when it comes to queer rights, because as I said at the beginning, the attack is based in religion. Even if people aren't saying it, the attacks are coming from what I refer to as toxic theology. Progressive voices of faith are not being heard. So we partnered with All Saints Episcopal, and I'll be honest, like it or not, the reality is, Gerald's church is primarily, LGBT. So is mine. So is Founders, that beautiful big building. We wanted this to be held at a mainline church because the allies needed to be there. Because it didn't need to have we didn't want to have the excuse of, oh, well, this is just about you talking about you. We needed to show the world, not the world, but, at least the area, that this is more than just, us queer clergy in the corner, trying to justify ourselves, because we get that a lot. And that's not the case. So we held, we held the Trans Day of Trans Day Visibility that was held at All Saints. We had an amazing representation of clergy. The people you see here are all faith leaders. We have here bishops from the Lutheran Church. We have the head of the area for Methodists, as well as Episcopal, et cetera, who were present. There were about 100 people in attendance for this event, which was amazing. This ended up spurring a number of articles. People were reaching out. We got covered in the AP, as well as other in other press. Shortly thereafter, the parental rights stuff came to California. And we knew about, actually, Gerald had told me about it at the end of May, I think it was, about an event that was something that was happening at Satakoy Elementary, which you've all seen on the news now. We debated on whether or not to go and be present, but we take the position that it is best to be invited to something that we're not organizing, because we don't want to go in as the Great White Hope. Oh, look at us, right? And then we were invited. We got calls and said, please, will you be there? We need a calming presence and peaceful folks to be there, because there was there was the threat of violence, and there was the request, could we be there? The organizer of the pro-LGBT side was a little hesitant, because unfortunately we also find that especially in pro-LGBT community, organizations and issues, they're very leery about faith communities. Like, why you? Well, so, we introduced ourselves, we went. I'm going to tell you, by the end of that day, not only organizers, but as I said, the police and others were really, really grateful, because they realized, we're just living who we are. And if you will, bringing a spiritual authority, not from top down, but from our hearts out, and that we really don't want to have violence here. That's the last thing we wanted to do. There was a lot of gratitude that was given. And then there were people from the LGBT Armenian group that asked us, would you please come to Glendale Unified? Because as you know, in Glendale, for months now, it's been primarily a large Armenian community that has been anti-LGBT. And see you later, Gerald. Is a large Armenian group has been coming out against. And so the LGBT Armenian group said, would you please come? So we were able to bring together a handful of people to go. And some were able to speak, and some were pepper sprayed. Reverend Mike Kinman from All Saints actually was outside and in trying to, break up a situation, he was pepper sprayed by the Proud Boys. We were then, after that, we were reached out to and invited to go to Chino Hills, where in Glendale, there is a supportive school board. In Chino, there isn't. So we were able to organize and go to Chino. I'm going to just share a few more things and then ask questions. This is a video. This is a 4-minute video that I think will bring it home of what the issues are that are happening now. So, which you all know, but just as a oopsie. Hold on. Let's see. Here we go.
This chaos unfolding in Glendale as the local board of education was set to adopt the month of June as Pride Month for 8 schools.
On the agenda, a resolution designating June as LGBTQ plus Pride Month, something the district has done for the last 4 years.
Democracy is under a covert attack from a small but loud group of well-organized, hateful fanatics. Sometimes they are in plain sight.
161 Republicans voted to get rid of the Department of Education.
And sometimes they're hiding in our own backyard.
My name is Jordan Henry. Come on the steps.
Can I just stop for a moment?
No, you're not. No, I'm speaking.
I will.
In my time.
Like most right-wing extremists, it didn't take him long to start appearing at board meetings, where he began his aggressive campaign of attacking teachers and school employees.
Yeah, you liars.
It's not appropriate to personally attack and denigrate a specific employee.
I'm not personally attacking
Yes, you
anybody.
are, sir.
No, ma'am, I'm not. You, Ingrid, a radical Marxist, you may think that you can't do a goddamn thing about it, but you can. Clearly you can.
To refrain from personal attacks. So
She
please,
is a government official. She's a government employee. This is not a personal attack. I pay her salary. You can count your educators, quote unquote, with radical Marxist Ingrid Elliott wrongfully accused Ray and me of being Nazis.
try to keep it
I've
professional.
already told you what I'm doing, and I'm making that very clear, and I'm not going to change. I'm here to talk as a parent.
Mr. Henry, you're a parent in Glendale Unified School District.
Yes, I live in Block Crescenta. I have a son who's 2 years old.
Under the guise of being a concerned parent of Glendale, despite not having a child in the Glendale school system. Like other extremists, he first tests the waters to see which talking point will generate the, quote, outrage he desperately needed to push his hateful agenda.
Anti-biased education, different pronoun, grooming them, totalitarian regime, Marxist radicals, critical race theory, gender transition, and Antifa.
While at the same time, cherry-picking materials, using misleading rhetoric.
Critical race theory practice that you yourselves are practicing.
Critical race theory is not taught in elementary schools or middle schools or high schools. It's a method of examination taught in law school, but cultural warriors are labeling any discussion of race, racism, or discrimination as CRT to try to make it toxic.
Then repetitively use trigger words. Give the false idea the listener is, quote, hearing this all the time.
Gender ideology, Marxism, critical race theory.
Why is this happening, though? This is sadly not a news story. Attacks on the freedoms of marginalized groups by extremists under the lie of being, quote, patriots has a long history. It is essential for the extremists to control the narrative by any means. Outrageous lies, personal attacks, controlling what your children can learn.
Every totalitarian regime does, along with confiscation and mutilation of reality, is confiscation of history and confiscation of culture.
In controlling what children are being taught in schools, they can shape, future generations to only know in America where minority groups are criminal, where diversity and inclusion are dirty words. And empathy for our neighbors does not exist, but that is not who we are as Americans. Although right-wing extremists have had some success in bullying and silencing those of us who speak the truth, we will not go away and we will not give up ensuring that our democracy, the true spirit of America, is not hijacked by a small but loud group of hateful cowards.
So just to bring this part to a close, this is from Glendale. This is Satakoy. This is an overall issue. This is Reverend Keith. This is all of these pictures here are from Satakoy Elementary. There's Stephanie. Yes, Pastor Stephanie. Somebody else knows her. This was Chino Hills board meeting. And then in question, what can you do? Be an ally, write letters, make calls, show up. This is something, and I'll send this information to you, Rick, you can send out. This is new. This is California AB 1078. It empowers parents and gives students the right to a diverse curriculum. What this bill will do will make it so that school districts cannot ban books in California, and they cannot put into place things that are they're about to vote in a week and a half in Chino, as well as they did in Temecula, which is to out trans kids to their parents.
Yeah.
And so this is, as I said, LA community. So the last thing before, the questions that I just want to share with you, when I said that when we went to Chino, two of us, not myself, but two of us were able to speak. And parents, there must have been at least 6 or 7 of them that came up to us before the evening was ended. And they were literally in tears. And the reason why is over and over they said, thank you so much, because they did not know that there were people of faith who cared about LGBT youth and staff. In this day and age, you think that they would. It would be a known thing, but it's not. In Chino, and this is not Florida. This is, 40 miles from where I live, 50 miles from where I live. The stuff we see in Florida and Tennessee is happening right here. In Chino, it's basically run by a mega church that the only view of faith, Christianity that they've heard is hateful. All of this stuff that's happened to the LGBT community has happened really, really, really quickly, which is why I think we're kind of rushing to catch up to response. But now more than ever, and I know all of us have a lot of stuff on our plates, a lot of stuff. But if there isn't if we don't all do something, we all write our letters and make phone calls, I'll send this information out. You can put this on your list just to make a response to this one, one piece of legislation here in California. If not, what we're seeing happening in Tennessee will happen here. And that's not over exaggeration. One of the things that's happening is when school starts again, we're going to see Glendale Unified and Chino Unified happen here. I live in Castaic. They're going to Hart. They're going Hart School District. They're going to Saugus. They're specifically hitting the smaller school boards or the ones that are located in what would be perceived as red areas. And twofold, while maybe if this legislation goes through, these acts that they're trying to put through won't pass, but the hysteria that's being ratcheted up is off the charts. I've been doing, as all of us here, I've been in the streets for 40 years, in protests and, demonstration, all that stuff. I will tell you, when I was at Saticoy was the first time I was scared for my safety. And this is 2023. I found out later, and as that video you just saw does say, the Proud Boys are in these activities. And it is no joke when you see the January 6th stuff, and that same mentality and persona is brought to these board meetings. And that is why over and over again, people of faith we've got to step up and step into these conversations. So anyway, that's us. That's what we're doing. Questions? Yeah, Mike.
I think that's applause.
Oh, yay.
I wanted to ask a question. Is there a role for lay people?
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. If you're, we've gone from being, if you will, kind of a support network of clergy to basically people of faith who identify however they identify orientation wise, but can come together to support. So yes, the answer is yes. And how would that be involved? We have two separate types of things going on right now. We do kind of have our, support time for clergy, but the bigger stuff and the majority of stuff we're doing right now is bringing people together, disseminating information, and then coming together for actions, to be present. So the answer is yes. And, I can either send information to Rick, or you can send me your information and I'll put you on the list when something's coming up. For instance, on July 20th, we're asking that folks show up to Chino.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
Right.
Cool. Carol Francis.
Yeah, thank you. Just what you just said about July 20th, is there going to be carpooling to Chino from the LA area that you know of?
Not that I know of at this moment, but that doesn't mean it won't happen.
It would be really good, because that's, I mean, I don't have a car, but even if I did, that's a long drive for one. I'm really interested in, you were talking about the controversiality, excuse me, of the word queer, and I'd like to know a little bit more about that. But, excuse me, I went into the Edendale Library, which is on Sunset and Alvarado. And when you first walk in the door, the first thing you see is this display of books for young people on trans rights and trans voices speaking out and gay rights, LGBTQ, I mean, it's just, that's really fantastic. And I'm wondering two things about that. Do you know if this is happening in other LAPL libraries to counteract what's happening in schools? Excuse me. And the other thing is there a book that you and others have written about what Jesus says and did not say, and in other words, a book for kids, teens, that deal with what religions say about love and caring and all that, and countering the message. Yeah. Lots been written on the subject, and that's a really fabulous question on stuff written for youth on the faith question. I will look into that. I'm certain it has, but I will look into that. By way of, is there? It's amazing and fabulous to hear about the Sunset Library. I can tell you that in areas like Huntington Beach, Temecula,
et cetera, there is, it's not quite, you're not going to be able to walk into their libraries and see an exhibit like that. And the other thing that's really interesting is, not just libraries, but, the whole Target controversy, right? Some Targets still have the well, not now because it's July, but, the merchandise was there, and in others they pulled, even in California. Again, that's more smaller areas, but there's a lot of small areas in California. Those numbers add up. And the last thing is around the question about queer. Part of that's a generational thing, where queer was a real derogatory term for folks coming out in the 60s and 70s. And it's been reclaimed, especially by the younger generation, as like a badge of honor. And so so part of it is a reclaiming of a slur. And the other is how it is now seen and experienced is that it is also an umbrella term now for LGBT and allies. Because, the LGBT, the LGB, sexual orientation, T, gender orientation, and then you have the A and the I and the plus. Well, I mean, that's, that's a lot to put on a business card, so queer ends up being the umbrella term that's often used. So
thank you. That's really good.
Yeah.
Explanation.
Yeah. So, Rick and then Phil.
Thank you for this presentation. It's been very informative, and it's good to know a little bit about the history of the group. And what struck me when you were speaking is that it seems like probably since time immemorial, we've been fighting the idea of reading your religious perspective from reading religion from the perspective of your neuroses. And I think for a lot of people, there's a lot of unreconciled questions that they have deep in their soul. And, like that guy that's at every board meeting talking about things like Marxism. And, there's a reason you repeat certain words. It's a mantra. Sometimes it helps you get deeper, and sometimes it helps you block stuff that you know that you need to deal with. And so it was very interesting to see that. I wanted to ask you, like, I think that with folks on the progressive side, on the more inclusive interfaith side, we always think that we can reason with somebody. I wanted to see if you think that more than trying to do that, maybe there's some points where we just work on things like the legislation that Josh Newman and others are working on. And because it's a vocal minority that you have to deal with, but it's a minority. And one of the worst things that you can do with somebody like that is just ignore them and sidestep them. So I want to get your opinion on in a strategic way, what you think would be the best.
It's a great question. I quite frankly, I never feel as my goal. I'll be honest. My goal is not to change the Proud Boys' mind, right? Because there's a whole bunch of agenda in that, right? And it's about power. It's not about any of the issues, really, right? However, their voices, they are a minority, but their voice is really, really, really loud. And it's the middle. We all know this in any of our social justice work. It's the middle who needs to be convinced. And when the only voice that is heard on an issue is that, like it or not, that seeps into quote unquote middle America, right? Whether it's about, LGBT issues or racial issues, et cetera, that craziness becomes the norm. And I was doing an interview with NPR, and he said, after it was done, we were talking, and he said, he was the head of the religious area, but before he was in dialogue with the person who had his position in the past. And the reason that the progressive voice wasn't interviewed and given the megaphone, if you will, was twofold. One is those of us who are progressive usually are like a live and let live mindset, right? You do you, I do me, right? And I'm not going to force my voice on you. However, we are usually the voice of reason and inclusion. And if we're silent, I'm just going to say this is not the time to be silent. It's not the time to be silent about racial issues. It is not the time to be silent about queer issues. It is, workers' rights, all of that. And he himself admitted, the person he was talking to, that he did a disservice because what they did is they gave the megaphone to the crazies. They gave the megaphone to the minority voice. So that's why we only hear toxic theology. I mean, I heard a lot of us on here are Quakers and Unitarians, et cetera. I mean, religious science. I mean, spot on life-affirming theologies. And we've got to get over ourselves. I'm just going to be honest, get over ourselves, and people need to hear what you believe. I mean, because all of our faith traditions are positive, life-affirming decisions, and we are programmed to kind of like don't evangelize, and because we see the people who are like wah 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 because we don't want to be like them. Well, be like them. I mean, don't be ashamed to speak about your faith. I mean, I'm just going to say that flat out and clear. Do not be ashamed about talking about what your faith believes in, because, and here's the reason why, again, I just keep going back to these heterosexual parents, right? Who were in tears because they hadn't heard what all of the people on this call believe. They hadn't heard that there was a faith community that valued their LGBT kids. And that took me to task, as well as I want to say takes all of us who have life-affirming progressive values and faith traditions to task. We've got to let people know what we believe. And I do believe we're in the majority, right? I really do. But if nobody hears it, so, our message has got to be spoken so that people in the middle won't stray to the right, right? Because if that's the only thing out there, sooner or later, it's going to get into the consciousness. So I hope that answers your question. So I don't know who is next. Phil, Phil?
Yeah. You mentioned that you're aware that Quakers are allies to the LGBTQ community. But it occurred to me that I wasn't sure how that plays out organizationally, because we don't have pastors. and our leadership is lay leadership.
Right.
And many Quaker organizations are active and vocal on these issues, but we don't have clergy who are going to go to an organization that's clergy focused. If you follow me.
Right.
Anyway, so I just have some questions in my mind about how that plays out in a clergy-based organization.
I think it goes back to the other question Mike asked of, is there a place for laity? And as I said, yes, it's becoming more and more so for us, because, again, while we do have, meetings, we do have some meetings that are for supporting each other as clergy people. More and more, we're seeing that our organization and what we're doing in things such as this is not just a clergy thing. This is, laity and clergy alike. So yes, there are entry points. Absolutely. And again, I'll send information to out, and then it can be shared. I'll send it to Rick, and it can be shared, and then you can, just send me an email, and I'll put you on the list of things and let you know. Yeah. I think Rose was next. I think it was Rose, Maggie, et cetera. So Rose?
I think I was maybe the last one.
Okay. Rose?
Okay, thank you. I have two questions, actually. I hope you can kind of deal with both of them.
Sure.
One, when I was reading about the Satakoy and the Glendale thing, I made the exact link that you did, that it seemed to be very much centered in the Armenian community. Mm-hmm. And I was wondering if there's have any of you made any outreach to the Armenian religious leaders? Mm-hmm. Because it just seems if they have a power that might be a way to work. That was one question. Mm-hmm. The other, looking at the footage of all these, to my eyes, young people who are these, the Mums for Liberty and all the rest of them. They're all young. As a retired educator, where did we go wrong? Those are my two questions.
Yeah, I don't know. I will say to your first one, we haven't, as of yet, been able to get the time to do the bridge building conversations. It is something that many of us talked after Satakoy of, one of the things that we want to do is to be able to provide an opportunity for people to come together to talk about this. And then we realize but in delving deeper, one of the things that we have found is, so first of all, why is it Armenian? The only reason why in Glendale and Satakoy, things were organized primarily by the Armenian community is because the community there is so large. It's a very large percentage of people. So I think in a way it was, we have to be careful about saying, well, it's the Armenians. Well, in those areas, it happens to be the Armenian community, and that's a very tight-knit community. And so, when one says go, then the others say yes, right? But here's an interesting thing. At the same time that happened, we had an Armenian couple come to our church who wanted to use our space for a day school during the summer. And we actually, I didn't say like, well, hey, want to make sure, we're LGBT. Like, they came to us, they saw our space. But after the Glendale issue, I had to say, okay, wait a minute, we need to talk about the elephant in the room. You really do know we're LGBT, right? So we needed to be careful because, if any of their families came to our space and went, I need to make sure we were okay. And they said, yes, of course we know who you are. And they said, and it's their issue, not ours, right? And so if they have a problem with it, it's their issue. So in a weird sort of way, it's kind of cool that we're partnering together because the Armenian community is coming into a queer space, right? We don't make any bones about it. We fly the flags and it's on our signs. And so in a quiet way, it might build bridges. Our goal is hopefully to be able to do just that, what you said, to sit down with different sides. But as we have seen these things grow, this isn't just, the Baptists, right? This isn't just the evangelicals. This is the freaking Proud Boys and the Moms for Liberty people. And they don't care. We've been able to sit down with the Mormons and we've been able to sit down with the Baptists and talk about real theological issues, right? But these people, this is not just about faith. They're putting the cloak on that it is. So we're not there for them. We're there, like I said, for the people in the middle. to be able to find their voice. And where did we go wrong? I don't know. Where did we go wrong as a society? I don't know. That'll be the subject for many books. Maggie?
So I find that where I have difficulty is that I myself don't really know the right answers. I mean, I may be able to say love is the most important thing, but I have a friend who, she also got her master's degree when I got mine. So we're both very smart. And she'll pick out some little thing like the family that sued Kaiser for transgender surgery at the age of 13. Or she'll pick something like that I might not know where my stand is, or the sports star who is trying to compete against has had the transgender surgery and is now a woman and competing against women, but has the musculature of a man. And so is that fair? There's things like that they will bring up. She doesn't bring up, oh, isn't it terrible that there was a gay marriage? She brings up these things that are blatantly harmful, I think, that have happened. So my own enlightenment, I'm not woke because I don't know how to argue that, like what is the right answer there is my question. So she'll pick something where I'm not sure what my view should be.
I mean, I think what you just said, love is love, right? Love is the most important thing. And it's funny that you picked the sports thing. My dad's pretty cool, right? He's Catholic, he's lifetime Catholic, but liberal Catholic. And but it was really funny because the sports thing is the one that he brought up.
Well, that's what I'm talking about. That's where the real argument comes in. How do I discuss this?
Well, you can also say, you're right. That one does have some, that one's a little trickier. But if we really want to unpack that, there's when that woman went on, when you go on estrogen, your testosterone goes down, right? So she does, while she had a particular build, even the muscles and musculature, it's not as if when the testosterone was running through her body, right? So, and I know a lot of women-born women who have really high levels of testosterone, right? So is this a gender issue or a testosterone issue, right? I mean, remember that in the Olympics, there have been some women who their testosterone was measured and it was too high. They were banned from competing. So, that's an interesting point, friend. And let's look at this in a really larger issue, and there are women, women-born women, if you will, that again, is this a testosterone issue or is this a body issue? And when we get into the minutia, and this is what I told my dad, I said, we can split hairs about everything, but let's step back and look at the forest. There might be a point. There might be a point for the sports competition, but we cannot make our decisions based upon hysteria and stereotypes. So,
if I can maybe say something too, that one way to kind of narrow down the conversation for you, Maggie, is to say, how many people do you think are affected more by an issue when a athlete is able to compete that there might be some issues with, or that your grandchildren will not be able to have a book read to them because somebody is wearing drag, or they might not hear about Stonewall because your school district is fighting to prevent history and an actual historical event from being known to the general public. Which do you think affects you more? And I think, and I think it does two things. It helps you kind of take control of that conversation. And
Mhm.
also, if they are in any way aware of what's going on, they'll start to see, oh
Mhm.
yeah, they're picking stuff out to get a reaction from me and to work on my neuroses.
Mhm.
So they're either going to run from you or maybe have a moment of clarity. So,
Mhm. Yeah. And I want to get to the other three questions that are up, but I want to share this with you. Some of the other stuff that's coming out, speaking of buzzwords, at Satakoy, the biggest thing that kept coming out is, now this whole issue at Satakoy Elementary was because they were going to have a pride assembly and they were going to read the big book of families. And I was like, what? I mean, it was a book written in England years ago. And it simply says, I mean, it was read to my kid, right, in school. And, all it simply says is it acknowledges the different configurations of family. This phrase is like, some families have two mommies and two daddies. Some families have kids are raised by grandma. Some are blah, blah, blah. Some kids have two moms and two dads. Some are foster kids, some are adopted. And then it continued on about pets and where you lived and blah, blah. Those 4 words caused that protest. Those 4 words. They were simply going to read a book that had those 4 words. And in response to that, we were screamed at for 2 hours, calling us groomers. We're sexualizing children and exposing them to sex in kindergarten because of the acknowledgement that some kids have 2 moms and some have 2 dads. Okay. Wait until they're 10 years old before you introduce this stuff to kids. I want to tell you another story. My kid is almost 16. My kid was raised by 2 moms. They went to West Hollywood Elementary, pretty liberal school, wasn't anti-gay by any stretch. But in this whole thing that happened with Satakoy, we sat down and had a conversation, and they said, Mom, I really wish that my family was normalized in elementary school, because they said every Father's Day, they'd sit down, okay, kids, let's make a card for Dad. And they'd go, I don't have a dad. What do you mean you don't have a dad? Did he die? No, I've never had a dad. Well, that's weird. And every year that kid had to explain themselves to their teacher and to their classmates. They never told me this until just recently. And they said, Dina, Mom, it really made me feel bad. And so by not talking about this until 10 years old, you're telling my kid that their family doesn't even exist until they're 10 years old. Now, Maggie, going back to your question. Wow. So there's a college athlete who has to compete against somebody who has more testosterone in their body than she does. No offense, I don't give a flying flick about it. Right? Because this bigger issue is telling kids like mine that their families are wrong because they're not spoken about, or they're spoken about derogatorily. And they said, if we can't talk about my family, then we sure better not be able to talk about any other kid's family. This is what's happening to kids. When they say save our hands off our kids, or save our children, or whatever, my response is, or leave our kids alone. Leave our kids alone is the slogan. I'm like, yes, leave my kid alone. So that's the ramification of this stuff. At Chino, when we went there, the valedictorian of the graduating class got up to speak. here's this kid. He's getting into Harvard. He had a 4.0, probably a 4.3, and he said, you know what? Rainbow flags, because the conversation that night was about, they, by the way, passed a ruling saying that only the American flag and the California flag can be up in classrooms. No other flag. And it was all to ban the rainbow flag. And he said the rainbow flag did nothing to distract me from my schooling, right? So he's speaking as that kid walked back to his seat. One of those in attendance, was a Proud Boy, went up to him and said, "Your dad should be killed because he's allowed you to be who you are." That kid was devastated. He started to text the organizer, who I was in communication with later. She told me the story, and he was in a full-blown anxiety attack after that. That's how come we have to speak up and say, there's another way of being. Anthony, go ahead.
Well, I want to thank you so much for really waking us up. I'm a Quaker and I've been supportive of LGBTQ rights for a long time, but things have changed and things have gotten a lot worse. I think it's related to what Rick talked about at the beginning, which is this deep division in our country and this rise in political violence. And I'm going to use the word fascism. One of the things about the rise of fascism is that it targets not just Marxists, but homosexuals. That happened in Germany. We're seeing the same kind of effort to kind of direct a lot of fear and anger towards groups that are minority groups in order to maintain the power of the elites in our country. And it's important to speak out as you're doing and as we all need to do, because what Niemeyer said, first they came after the trade unionists and the socialists, and he didn't mention the homosexuals, but that was also another group that was targeted. So I want to thank you for your presentation, and I think that we just have to keep that bigger picture in mind, that we're all part of a struggle to prevent our country from what essentially will be an authoritarian takeover. We need to all work together. By the way, I work on housing justice issues, and what you're telling me about the reaction of people towards LGBTQ is also directed towards people who are experiencing homelessness.
Yes.
We had an issue in San Dimas and Laverne where there was a proposed affordable housing for people experiencing homelessness who were elderly, over 55. 3,000 signatures were signed, 300 people protested, and the people who supported this project, who went to the city council meetings, felt unsafe. They felt they needed extra security because of the hostility directed towards them, simply because they wanted to see unhoused elderly people housed. So we've got a intersectional issue here where there's a real effort to sort of push back against anybody who's different in our country, defined as different from the normative white heterosexual perspective. So I want to thank you again. I think it's a good reminder to all of us. Be sure to include information about that bill.
I will.
You want us to support.
I will.
I don't have the time to go to Chino, unfortunately, but I think I do have time to make phone calls and write. So please keep us informed. And I hope that our organization, ICUJP, can take more of a stand. So thanks again.
You're welcome. And this is connected. And remember, I know for myself, being from, California, looking at what was happening in Florida, when we first started to see the erasure of Black history, African-American history, right? One book by one book by one book. And then it was the high school, the elementary and high school and then college. And then we saw the same thing, Don't Say Gay. It was just in elementary school. And then look what they did to New College, right? Okay. So we've seen it. And what you just said, Anthony, about for those experiencing homelessness, it's the same thing. think about it. Homeless, communities, color, and queer. Right? And we're all connected there, by the way, but it's the marginalized. It's the marginalized. And, most of us on this call are in, positions of power because of the color of our skin. Let's use it. Let's use our privilege, right? And to continue to make the differences that we do, right? And the last thing I'll say about that, and then continue with the questions, is, sometimes especially in this issue, a lot of the activism we can do is just in our conversation with our friends and our family. Especially in our conversations with our family. It's usually the hardest, but it's probably one of the most powerful, right? Because you plant the seeds there and they'll plant the seeds and they'll plant the seeds, right? So Sophia and then Phil.
Yes, thank you for your presentation. I wanted to talk about, this is a very well-funded campaign. Heritage
absolutely.
So how do we get the left not to be baited and react? Because then you are perpetuating this cycle of violence. Yeah. And I think I've been trying to talk to everybody about it. Yeah. And it's very hard because people want to react right away and then you fall right into it. And then the sensationalism and the media. The other thing is the misinformation. So in my opinion, also in Glendale, and with any school district, when you have English as a second language, even as a first language, it's not working because you'll get a text, you'll get an email, there's a digital divide, and parents feel offended with they're not included in decision making. And people who are heterosexual and don't want their children taught at a younger age is a valid argument that it should be parents that teach them. And so I have to respect everybody's perspective. But when we have a system and a school system that doesn't bring parents into that conversation, and it happens, the disinformation that they are fed online, as an example, transgender people reading to your children, and then you get a picture of a trans man with a big bulge. Everyone's going to say, no way, hell no. Right. And that's the response. The other situation is videos going around that have now been debunked about the book that's being read. And that book information is wrong and it's lying. And people believe what people post. So those people who are not in that circle, there was a video going around about two boys experimenting with each other, touching themselves. And people, no way, that's not going to be read to my kid. So when people are disinformed and then you're in their face within seconds, they're going to fight you because they're protecting their children from what they believe is perversion. Of course. And grooming. So we cannot stand off, and you have to face it. And I had to deal with a young boy who was the biggest guy on campus, right? And I'm walking and he comes just upset on the street. I'm like, what's going on? He got attacked because one of the boys came up to him. It was Pride Week. And they attacked him because he didn't know the right pronoun. And well, they picked on you because you're the biggest guy on campus, right? And they wanted to see how you were going to react. And I talked to him for like half an hour, had to walk him home. And he felt picked on. And I talked to him about Matthew Shepard, and I talked to him about describe to me what's going on. And he was freaking out. This was a while back. This was not recent. But I was like, you should be focusing on your SATs and why is this happening? Turn him back. And I go, if you don't know the right pronoun, tell him, I'll call you by your name, just to try and bridge. But also try and de-escalate the situation and help him understand that young boy walks down the street and he walks down the street, he will never have to fear of being beaten or murdered. And having the conversation, but I had children talking to me this month about the same issue. Children didn't want to hear it. Children, I don't want to talk about Pride Month. I don't want to talk about the same question about athletes. And the young boy telling me it's not right. And I have to listen and not judge and explain. Well, I want to hear you out. I want to hear what you have to say. And when I saw the trauma in those children saying that this was impacting them and they're faith-based, I can't turn myself away. I have to listen and know that they have their own situations that they're dealing with, and not to demonize them either, because they have the right to their feelings and to uphold their religious beliefs without being discriminatory or hateful, and trying to tell them to be careful and share with them that there's a lot of disinformation. But I got some children that were not disinformed. They were just uncomfortable. And I think my question is to you still, how do we stop the left from reacting to the well-funded campaign that's out there? And if you're going to go to Chino and it's going to be well-funded, and continue to allow that hate to go out there, how do we regulate that and not bring in more people and continue it? And I've always said, when you're under attack, you turn off the lights and you make sure, if you're being bombed, to protect yourself and not be baited. So how can we do it so we're not baited?
Right.
Thanks.
Great comments and question. One of the things that I'm glad those kids had somebody like you to talk to, first of all. And I think the thing that's missing, that either we've forgotten to do or we've never really done it well, is there are the kids who they have their own religious. I mean, part of it is, part of what I heard, some of the kids say really are repetition of what their parents are saying. I mean, I'm going to tell you, left to their own devices, this generation gets it, right? I mean, my God, they're more accepting than any of us have been. That said, there are, as you said, there are kids who have their own, faith beliefs and their own, and hopefully it's theirs and not their parents, parenting their parents. But we're supposed to be a society to be able to create space so that the kid here who's got his beliefs and the kids here who have their belief. I mean, you have a queer kid here, say, who, that's who they are. And then you have somebody who's like, I don't really believe that. Well, I think the more important thing to teach is, how do we coexist? Right? How do we coexist? The conversation maybe shouldn't be, let me change your mind, but how can we understand each other? Right? That's number one. Number two is, why do you, I'm glad to hear, you pointed out, that other kid who's been bullied. I mean, it's unfortunate that, now violence has been, lifted up as the only way to deal with stuff. And you have, how many different populations, whether it's communities of color, whether it's queer community, whether it's whatever, the left outs, the picked ons, right? Finally saying enough is enough. And that's hard, because I'm going to tell you, I've been out for 4 years, and it still hit me when these people were screaming that I'm a groomer. I'm like, fuck you. I'd excuse my language, but I mean, it was just like, really? But going to these events, do not go, if you feel as if you're going to be triggered, because you will not be any, I mean, we all know that dealing with we all know that a situation like a school board meeting that is going to have all these wackadoodles show up, what's the choice? Don't go. Well, then what that does is show the school board that the only people who are concerned are people who don't like positive, affirming messages, right? So our side has to go, but how are we going to show up, right? And how we have to show up at these things, if it's to me, these are actions, right? They're the old fashioned, this is the demonstration, this is the protest, right? So how are we going to show up to the protest? I mean, Saticoy is a great example, because, the organizers and ourselves both had the mindset of like, be cool, you guys, don't engage. And there were like 5 or 10 folks from the pro LGBT side who literally got in their faces, right? And got in the cops' faces. So one of the things that we as clergy did was to try to de-escalate and to like, no, don't give them your anger. Don't give them your anger. This isn't the place. Because when we give them our anger, we feed it. We feed the dragon, right? And so, our job was to, let's de-escalate. And it was a real shame because, I was interviewed for a lot of articles after that. And the unfortunate thing is, here were 100 people, basically kumbaya-ing it, right? Being peaceful, being positive, la la la. And what they focused on was the last 30 minutes when 95% of us had left and 5 agitators stayed and caused violence, right? I mean, they weren't the ones throwing punches, but I mean, it was antagonistic. And, our media is run by violence. And, so, but the more that level-headed people can be showing up, I mean, it really is a matter of crazy, violent, peaceful, and the more peaceful people who can show up, then at least in the media, and it's a media thing, let's just be honest, is that it can show at least that the violence is not the only voice. And again, for our folks, and this is for any going to the hotel, strike, going with Clue, going with, any of these things, what's in the trainings, right? The nonviolence training. Don't go if you're going to be escalated. Don't go if you're going to be triggered. If I'm in a bad mood, I better not go. So we have to pick and choose. And some of us are called to be able to go to these things. And some of us are called to be behind the scenes. So I think it's a matter of, and a continued education. That's what I try to do. We all try to do, right? If we're going to go and stand up for people at a march or at a rally, we will not do that group any good by going off at the other folks. It's a bigger conversation, but, violence breeds violence. So, great points. Phil?
Yeah, actually, I initially raised my hand because I had some comments and questions, but now I think it's about bringing this to a close.
Okay, sorry.
We need to wrap up and make some room for announcements and for our closeout process. But I just wanted to say that I really appreciate what you said today, and my own journey around LGBTQ issues has been one of progressive wokeness, if you will, around different issues. Starting out with feeling I needed to defend an openly gay kid in high school who was getting bullied. And that's kind of where my consciousness started growing. But but I particularly appreciated your comments about the trans female athletes in response to Maggie's question, because I shared Maggie's concerns and ambivalence about that issue. And so I really appreciated the clarification you provided with that.
Good.
And with that, do you have any closing comments? And then we'll move into our other closing.
I just put in the chat my number and email. Feel free to contact me if any further questions, etc. And if you want to be put on a mailing list. I just deeply appreciate you, having this conversation and just continuing to, it's been, for me, I don't want to bury any more people from homophobia, transphobia. I mean, in the beginning of my ministry, I buried more people from HIV and AIDS than I've buried since. And then it was people who took their lives, people who were killed. And it wasn't until like 10 years into my ministry that I actually buried somebody from old age. And I especially don't want to see our kids repeat this cycle. And that's why I do what I do. And I think that's why we all do what we do. We're all here to create a better world, and, just keep being who you are, and we will. And thank you for standing beside me, and you can be guaranteed I'll stand beside you. Maybe sometimes I can't do it in person, but I can do it, Anthony said, or somebody said, I don't have the time to go, but I sure can write that letter. Right. Yeah. And so thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. And we should keep in touch about the AB bill, and also the is it Chino or Chino Hills?
Chino Valley Unified School District.
Oh, Chino Valley. Okay. Yeah, we'll definitely get in touch with that, because Josh Newman, I think, is my representative. I'm pretty sure that just got redrawn. So, but yeah, thank you very much for coming.
You're welcome. Yeah. And I'll be back when I can get up early. Because you do really cool stuff, and this is the stuff that I do.
It's easy. Just go to bed early on Thursday and set your alarm clock.
Sure. No problem. With a teenager and 5 animals and a partner.
Yeah.
Wait, 5 animals? Oh my God.
Yeah. You're lucky. I had that back screen on thing because the cat was walking by.
We love to see people's animals.
Right.
Yeah.
Next time.
Yeah. There you are.
Good morning, everyone. Jasmine, Haley, ICUJP board member, Christian Science, and Reflection. From there, I have 3 books by Alice Walker. They're here, and 3 quotes from each of them. Okay. I wrote him back, "Dear son, we're all fine in God, in Lord's grace, and hope this finds you the same. JT and me be out all times of the day and night in our car you give me, which you didn't have to do. Oh, I do appreciate the mink and the new self-cleaning oven. Even, but if you sending any more stuff to eat from Germany, I'm going to have to open up a store in the neighborhood just to get rid of it. Really, we have more than enough of everything. The Lord is good to us, and we don't want. Glad to hear you as well. Yes, absolutely. Getting your rest, your right rest. There ain't nothing like exercising to help that along. JT and me work some part of that every day, that we don't go fishing the garden. Well, so long, soldier. Sincerely, Gracie May. Rosalie. Dearly beloved, she dreams, dragging herself across the world, a small girl in her mother's white robe and veil, knees raised waist high through a bowl of quicksand soup. The man who stands beside her is standing on the front porch of her house, being married to the sound of cars whizzing by on Highway 61.
gonna let you get their Robux. So, no one's gonna let you get their Robux. No one.
Yeah. Thank you. And I hope that adds to the discussion. I hope that we can incorporate more Black, Brown, Indigenous, BIPOC people in this conversation, because more people need to know that they are.
It's Fun Friday.
Yes, that their love is loved, and their love is recognized, and their love is validated. Yeah, that it's important that we do that and have spaces for them to share. Thank you.
Can I watch it?
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, daughter.
And next time you'll have to let them participate too. They're gonna have to read, I see.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Thank you so much.
Okay.